Let's talk about sex. I know it's uncomfortable, but sex is a natural part of life. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Sex is a natural part of life. In fact, it creates life, and something as important and foundational as sex should be taught in a public school setting. I believe that sex education, comprehensive sex education, and inclusive sex education are necessary as a part of a public school system. We're going to talk about the effects it has on teen pregnancy, how inclusion of every sexuality in public sex education would be helpful in maintaining inclusion. And we're going to talk about how the current political landscape requires their voters to be educated on sex and how it works. First, we'll talk about teen pregnancy rates. According to a quasi-experimental evidence gathered by Nicholas D.E. Mark and Lawrence L. Wu, published in Public Medicine Central in February 2022, teen pregnancy rates are affected positively when sex is taught comprehensively in a public school setting. We see lowered infections and STIs, and we see a lower rate of teenage pregnancy and teenage pregnancy being carried to term in these situations. According to Comprehensive Sexuality Education, published by the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in November 2016, there's also reduced STD and STI infections in students who are taught public sex education comprehensively. Next, we'll talk about inclusion. As published by Jenny Betts, the Director of Education and Youth Programs at the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, as published by the New York Times in 2015, we see that only 5% of students, we see that only 5% of LGBTQ students are taught comprehensive sex education that is relevant to them. This has huge effects on these kids. I mean, if you're not taught comprehensively on something that affects you directly, it affects your health, it affects your mental health, it affects your future relationships, the way you interact with people. These are important topics that need to be taught through all public education. According to Including LGBT Content in Sex Education, 4 Wrong Ways, written in 2019, inclusivity and opportunity for students who are looking to be taught sex education needs to happen in a public setting. I know it can be uncomfortable. Sex is something we don't like to talk about, especially in a public school setting because of the way that it's set up, but it's necessary. I mean, kids don't have loving parents all the time. There's not always a situation where they're going to learn these things at home. It's absolutely necessary. It is so necessary that this gets taught in a public school setting. Young LGBTQ people require proper sex ed. Next, we're going to talk about the political landscape and how it requires well-educated voters. According to most voters in both political parties support sex ed in schools, published by the POZ Newsfeed in 2019, despite partisan issues, parties came together and agreed that public sex education is necessary. Not just public sex education, but public comprehensive sex education. So this means teaching the entire spectrum of what sexuality could look like depending on the person and the child. According to Planned Parenthood, new national poll shows likely voters strongly support sex education and federal funding for teen pregnancy prevention. So, despite all of the partisan issues that we see in public politics today, we are continuing to see an agreement on one thing, and that is public sex education and how it would affect the young people of today. Once again, an overwhelming number of voters agree that this is necessary and important. Today, we discussed benefits of sex ed, how it is imperative for young people to make educated decisions, and how teaching an inclusive sex education is important for all students. Sex ed is non-negotiable for educators. This is a necessary lesson that must be taught. Thank you.